Could you tell? That was celebrate, celebrate. I know it's coming up on the last days and I feel like I haven't been there to celebrate, so we're gonna celebrate our happy last video today as we do 12-7 extension and completing the square. So I really, really, really miss you guys, and I so wish that I could be there to wish you a very happy summer and all that sort of thing, but I will just do it by video. So happy summer and get through all the rest of this. We are about done. This is your last video. On your on your homework audit, I am not going to assign that last review. If you want to do it before you take the quiz, that's up to you. But we're not giving a quarter exam, so we didn't feel like it was a necessary thing to do that whole review. The quiz will just be over 12-4, 5, 6, and 7. It will not include this extension, okay? But this extension is important for us to review for your Algebra 2 year next year. So after this week, you basically are finished up with your successful completion of all of this with all of your geometry years. So congratulations, and again, best wishes for a wonderful, wonderful summer. So this week, we will just have a short video here and another short reteach, because there's only going to be the one worksheet. There's only 4, I think, examples on that reteach extension. So there'll be 10 points for the reteach extension and then 10 points for one assignment. So you just have the one assignment. But you also have the quiz this week. So remember, do what you need to do to study for the quiz. We're not going to collect anything. It's just up to you. And it'll be the same kind of quiz as we've done before, 5 multiple choice questions due by Thursday, 9:30 a.m. So try to do it on Wednesday. So you'll have that kind of cushion to get that all done. So quiz this week, reteach. So quiz will be 5 points, reteach will be 10 points, because you also have your video notes, and then your assignment will be 10 points since there's just one of them. Okay? Again, any questions or anything, email me or any of your teachers, and have an awesome, awesome summer. Let's get started. Okay, this week is really just one, and it's basically algebra as we look at the extension on completing the square. So it is still 12-7. So if you think about 12-7, get rid of a few balloons here in our celebration. What you're looking at in 12-7 is to say we were able to find the center and the radius. And so you really had the center radius equation of the circle. So if I gave you something like x plus 1 quantity squared plus y minus 2 quantity squared is equal to 4. That's the center radius form, because I could easily find the center and easily find the radius, of course. So now all we're doing is kind of like with equations of lines. We're simply expanding this and rewriting it in a different form. It's exactly the same information. So what we're going to do is to say now they're going to take that x plus 1 and they're going to FOIL that out. So remember how all year I kept telling you, you need to make sure that you can do the shortcut on that. So the shortcut on that was to square the first term and then to do twice the product. Okay, so it would be 1x plus 1x. Okay, twice the product would be 1 times x, double it would be 2x, and then the last term. So if you can start skipping that step, that would be great, but understand that it's exactly the same thing. So my x plus 1 quantity squared and my x squared plus 2x plus 1 are exactly the same thing, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing here. We won't have to write this every time, but as we look at it to begin with, y minus 2 quantity squared means y minus 2 times y minus 2. And of course it's still equal to 4, okay? So all they're doing is saying I can have a different form by expanding this on out. And again, we're not going to write all of this every single time because we're going to use that shortcut. Square the first term, twice the product, so it would be negative 2y doubled, negative 4y, and then square the last term. So this is exactly the same as this, okay? And it still equals 4. Okay, so they've expanded all that out. Now they're just going to go ahead and put it into the standard form, which would be x squared plus 2x plus y squared, got the squared there, minus 4y. And now we're going to take the 1 and we're going to put it on the other side. We're going to take the 4 and we're going to put it on the other side. Or actually, we're going to set it equal to 0 to be standard form. So if I put 4 on this side, it would just be plus 4 equals 0. Okay? And that's really all there is to looking at it in a different form. Okay? So all I've done is to say I'm squaring it. Let me get a little bit closer so you can see it. Okay? I'm squaring it out and saying now I've got it in a different form. That would be our standard form because it's set equal to 0. So we're just going from our center radius form to our standard form. Now I got to tell you, that's not what we're doing, okay? What we're actually going to do is to say, I'm going to give them to you in standard form, and we're not going to have any of this, and you're going to have to go backwards and say, I got to be able to go from here to get it back into the radius and the center form, okay? Okay, so what are we going to do to undo this is really what we're looking at. And in order to do that, we are completing the square. So when I'm completing the square, right, we're really just saying, okay, now I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to go backwards. What I'm going to do then is put all my x squareds and my x terms together. So I'll put my x squared and my 2x together. Then I'm going to put all my y squareds and my y terms together, okay? And I'm going to leave a space here, so I'll put my y squared and my y term together. And then to complete the square, I'm going to leave that constant on the other side, which I started to do earlier, okay? So I'm going to say it equals -1. Now at this point, you always want to double check and make sure that I haven't changed any signs because as I switch around on the equal sign, it's common to switch out and make a mistake on that. So we don't want to switch any signs. Now we're doing what you did in Algebra 1, at least most of you, completing the square. So to complete the square, you're going to be hearing it said a lot of times, let me go back to that blue, that what we're doing is saying, okay, now we're undoing what we just did. So now we're going to do half. Instead of saying times 2, we're going to do half what they call the middle term. So I'm going to say half the middle term squared. And that's what you're going to hear me say a lot. Half the middle term, and then when you square it, you will have completed the square. Half the middle term squared. That's completing the square. And a lot of you did that last year. Okay, so half the middle term squared. And that's really what we're going to be looking at now is saying, okay, we now are going to do that for each of these terms. So the problem is going to look like this, and then I'm just going to arrange it. So I'm going to do half of 2, square it. But remember your algebra, what you do on one side, I have to do on the other. So I'm adding 1 to both sides. Make sense? Okay, and then this is that same review as we did last year where we're saying, okay, that's half the middle term, so -4, half of that would be -2. When you square it, it's always going to be positive, so +4. Now, I picked that because obviously you already know the answer for that, okay? That was the problem we just started with, but you've got to understand that what we're doing, completing the square, is not changing the problem. So you saw that in the original problem. Now look what we can do. We can say, take the square root of x, sine from the middle, square root of the last one, and you've got it back to the what you started. Okay, do the same thing here. Square root of y, do that in a different color. So square root of y squared will just be y. Sine from the middle, square root of 4. So that y minus 2, quantity squared, is what I started with, is the same thing as that trinomial. Okay? And the x plus 1, quantity squared, which is what I started with, is the same thing as that trinomial. So that's why I said we want to try to keep that middle term or that extra step out of it. But don't forget what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And that's exactly what we started with. So that we could find the center to be -1, 2, and my radius to be 2. Okay? So really, it's not too bad completing the square. We wanted to end with something you'll use a lot next year in Algebra 2, so it's a very important lesson, but one that you should be able to get pretty easily. Okay? So let's make sure we understand that completing the square thing. Let's say that I have, let's say I want to find the center and radius if I have x squared minus 4x plus y squared plus 10y plus 13 is equal to 0. Okay? And I really just wanted to put up a couple of cautions in your notes here, because that's really all it is a lot of algebra, just a couple of cautions. Just be very careful with the signs. Make sure that you don't change any signs. If you put it on the other side, you got to change the sign, okay? So we're going to say, okay, that puts our x squared minus our 4x together. Okay, so I haven't changed anything there. We're going to leave a space, put the y squared plus 10y together. So you put the y's and the y's together, y squareds and y's, x squareds and x's, and then move this to the other side. So don't forget that makes it a -13, okay? And then the other caution, so don't forget your signs, and then make sure that you complete the square by doing half the middle term squared. Now, the caution, I think that's the review, but the caution is to both sides. So it's so easy to complete the square and get caught up on that, but you have to make sure that you do that to both sides. So when I do that, let's go ahead and put that in a different color here. If I say half of -4 squared plus 4, then I got to come over here and do plus 4 also. Make sense? So don't forget to do to both sides. And here, if I say half of 10 is 25, then I got to do plus 25 on this side. So both sides, I'm doing plus 4, plus 25, plus 4, plus 25. Okay? And then I'm just undoing so that I have those completed the square. I've got it completed. I just write it as a square. So now I'd say x sign here minus square root of 4, 2, and there's my binomial from my trinomial. Same thing here, square root of y squared, y, positive because that's my middle term, square root of 25 squared. And that is exactly the same as that trinomial. Then I just add these together here, so that would be -9 plus 25, 16. And now you can see I have it in my center radius form. Now on your homework, you do have to find the center, so remember you're doing the opposite signs, +2, -5, and you have to find the radius. Okay, so that would be like the easiest problems on your homework, okay? Now let me just give you a couple of what happens if problems, and that will be it for the notes here today. So let's take a look at what happens if I don't have a positive number on the right-hand side. So let's say my original problem in standard form was x squared plus y squared minus 6y plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so you'll have problems like this on your homework. Now, what are you going to do with that? Well, you're going to do the exact same thing. Be careful of your signs. Get your x squareds and your x's together. Well, there are no x terms, so I just leave the x squared. No problem. Okay, then I go with my y squareds. I put my y squared and my 6y together, and I have a positive 1, so I subtract 1 and make it a -1 on the other side. So be careful of my signs, put the constant over on that other side, even if it's negative, because that's not the radius yet. Now, second example, I want to show you what happens if you don't have an x term here. Okay? Now, if you don't have an x term, then you really have 0. X and half of 0 is 0. Oh, that's going to be the one like Mike Tyson. You're going to have a center of 0 there. okay? So we really don't have to worry about that at all. Half of negative 6 is negative 3. Squared is 9. So what do I have to remember to do? The plus 9 to this side. That makes sense? Okay, so then my center radius form is just going to be x squared plus, take this trinomial now and make it into a binomial, square root of y squared, sine from the middle, square root of 9 is 3. Now, the next example, I wanted to say, what happens when you have 8 there? What are you going to do with that? Well, that's still in the center radius form. My center is 0. So just a reminder that if you don't have it minused or added to anything, it's 0. Opposite sign, so 0, 3. And my radius is the square root of 8. So yeah, you have a little algebra to do. I can't leave it as that. I have to break that down as 4 times 2. So my radius is 2 square roots of 2. Okay, so a little different. Sorry, there's a glare from the computer there. Okay, a little different, but you're still doing exactly the same thing. So standard form, and you're going down to center radius form so that you can find the center and the radius. Now, I have one last caution. So let's take a look at one last caution in our notes, and we'll have all our cautions done that we need to worry about here for this year. Okay, so let's say I have for my next example, 3x squared minus 6x plus 3y squared minus y plus 1/12 equals 0. So there's my standard form, okay? So, there's my standard form. Now I got to figure out how am I going to get the radius in the center. Okay, well, you can say, well, do the same thing and just say it's 3x squared minus 6x plus 3y squared minus y, and then put my negative 1/12 on that sign. So I've been cautious of my signs. I got positive, negative, didn't change any signs here. This went to the other side. I've got my positive. I've got my signs correct. Now, be careful with this, because when I look at doing half the middle term squared to both sides, I have to have a binomial that'll square to get back to this. Okay? Now, don't write this. I'm going to just go ahead and put this in red so you're not writing it. Because here's the mistake people will do. They'll say, well, let me just add 9 here. Well, if you do that, can you say, I'm going to have 3x minus 3? No, because 3x times 3x, when you square that, that's not going to come out right. Can I just make it a square root of 3? No, because when I double the product, that's not giving me 6x here. So our last hint, I have to make sure that you look at this, is if you have a leading coefficient, that is if the x squared or the y squared, either one of them is not 1, so there's our last hint, our last caution, the x squared and the y squared must start with 1. So make sure that your leading coefficient is 1, okay? Now in Algebra 2 next year, you're going to figure out what happens if one's 3 and one's 4. It's not that bad, but we don't have to do that in geometry yet this year. You also may be thinking, well, what happens if it's not a y squared plus an x squared? Well, then you don't have a circle, and it's not in our extension, okay? So this would be like the most difficult question. So you can kind of imagine what we're going to be doing here. We're going to have to do just a little more algebra. So now in order to have us have a leading coefficient of 1, I'm going to have to divide by 3 or multiply by 1/3. So I'll go ahead and show that on both sides. Okay, so it's just plain old algebra. 1/3 of 3x squared, now I have a coefficient of 1. 1/3 of negative 6x minus 2x. 1/3 of 3y squared. And what am I going to do with this? Well, I've got to make it 1/3 y. Okay, I've got to divide by 3 on everything. So if you want to say y over 3, that's the same thing. Okay, and then leave a space, and now what am I going to get here? Negative 136. Okay? Now, don't worry too much. We'll take another example of that in your reteach notes here, but it's really the same thing. So I wanted you to get the cautions down here. Okay? And then we're doing, okay, we do half the middle term squared. So we're going to do plus 1 here. We'll do plus 1 here. Half of 1/3. Now you get to use a calculator if you want, but 1/3 times 1 over 2 isn't too bad. That's 1 over 6. Then I have to square it. So I'm going to be adding 1/36. Remember to do that to both sides. Okay? So now you can say, okay, now I see it's not going to be any different. I have now x minus 1 quantity squared plus y minus, and then I'm going to take the square root of 136, so it's just 1/6. The 136 canceled out, so it ends up not being too bad. The center is obviously just 1/1/6, and my radius is the square root of 1 or 1. So be careful on the homework when you have a leading coefficient that's not 1. So those are our cautions. Really, that's it for the 12-7 extension. It's pretty much just algebra, okay? I have had an amazing year teaching you geometry. I really, really hope that you'll come and see me next fall, and then we'll be all back to normal where we can play sports and go to football games and just have a fun time. I hope that you have remembered a few of the jokes. I was talking about it to my grandson, who's going to be going into geometry. He's quite gifted. He's going to be in middle school somewhere, and he's going to be going into geometry already. So I was telling him some of the jokes. You don't get them if you don't understand geometry, huh? Well, thank you very much for your attention, and happy, happy summer. Okay, bye.